Welcome back. This is part two of our unit on pricing. In this video lecture, we're going to look at price adjustments, which means things that we do to promotions, discounts, things that are not setting, let's say, the base price for a product, but things that we might do from time to time to move off that base price, such as, let's say, a seasonal sale or a promotional discount. And we'll talk about what situations those fit and where the pros and cons of various different price adjustments. So our roadmap for today is that first of all, we're going to look at the pros and cons of the various price adjustments. Next, we're going to look at the various types of price adjustments and when they're best deployed. And lastly, we're going to look kind of a small little topic at the end, which is how a pricing strategy is regulated by public policy. So things like, for example, what's called dumping, which is deliberately lowering the price to, in a sense, to increase market share, or for example, price gouging, raising the price well above, let's say, a reasonable rate, something that we've experienced sometimes periodically in the last few months, as far as, let's say, price gouging for various items that are in short supply. Are these how these are regulated and how these might violate certain policies, and therefore firms and businesses do not have a full reign to kind of just set prices wherever they want. So let's start with looking at kind of things we talked about last time, which is things, pricing strategies that are within, let's say, the product mix. So first one we talked about is different product lines. So for example, if you have one company but different product lines, so this could be different makes of models of cars, for example, Corolla, Camry, etc., as different product lines that can have different price points. Secondly, we can include optional or accessory products, once again, with cars, different accessories that can be added on or taken away from the basic model. Also could be, you see this a lot with technology, in terms of, let's say, computer system or different accessories that would go. Captive pricing, this is more, was talking about things like printers and printer ink. Once you buy the printer might be relatively cheap, and therefore you set the price low. But once you buy the printer, you have to use a certain type of printer cartridge, and those might be priced higher to make up for, let's say, the loss. You can see this with gaming consoles, where the console system might be relatively cheap, but the software and the games themselves are relatively high priced. Byproduct pricing, which is that you might buy products, things that are um, created by different production processes that you want to get rid of. You might lower the price. So, for example, dirt fill is relatively low price because people are trying to get rid of it from construction products. They even often will give it away for you can get it delivered for free, and they'll include the shipping because it's something they're trying to get rid of. And lastly, product bundle pricing, which is like when you like think of in terms of like a meal at a fast food place where drink, fries, sandwich are cheaper if you buy them together as a bundle versus buying them individually. And just to kind of increase people's purchases by giving the idea that they're getting a bargain on the individual items. So some examples of this is, and I've shown you this before when we talked about price anchoring and we talked about why people are given three choices. So for example, Quicken is an online financial products site that different types of software. And you can get, home, basic, deluxe, premier, home, and business versions, etc. And they have different price points for the different types of mixes. Very often, these are trying to create the illusion that you're getting a deal by bundling them, but that's to try to encourage you to buy. For example, they already have the software; it doesn't cost them any more to produce an additional, let's say, something additional onto their software since it's already developed, and therefore it's all the more they get you to buy, the greater the profit margin they're gonna have on the transaction. But what we're going to talk mostly about in this video lecture are price adjustments. So these are not things that set the basic price. They're not part of your positioning. These are things that you might do to increase sales in the short term. So this can be discounts. This can be seasonal sales. This can be psychological pricing, which means pricing in such a way to create a sense of anxiety or immediacy. It can be pricing for different areas. So pricing meaning for one region versus another that can be different. Dynamic pricing, you see this a lot with rideshare where at busy times the prices go up, at weak times the prices go down, and this is to kind of, let's say, uh, create, particularly for things like public transportation and things of that sort, to even out the trips. And then you might see international pricing, which takes into account that there are different markets, different levels of living, but also shipping and different baskets of goods. So let's look at some of the more straightforward ones. Discounts. So what kind of discounts that you usually see? You see cash discounts. So you see this very often at gasoline stations where you have a cash price and a credit price. Very often a cash discount is provided because if they're paying cash or with a debit card, they are not charged for, let's say, the processing fees on the credit card transaction. As a result, they're willing to give you a discount from, let's say, their stated price. You might also see this in terms of, it's not so much a cash discount, but it's an Easy Pass discount. You see this on bridges and tolls, where if you use an Easy Pass, they represent it as a discount from the cash price that if you pay for the toll with cash and coin. You can have a quantity discount, which is basically the more you buy, the lower the unit is. You see this particularly in construction materials. So when you buy lumber or masonry or landscaping materials, the more you buy, the unit price goes down. Functional discounts for people who are within your network. Seasonal discounts, meaning if you buy off-season, so summer merchandise in the winter and winter merchandise in the summer, tend to be discounted. So particularly with seasonal discounts, things like hospitality. So if you decide to take a vacation to a resort or you go at a time where it's not particularly a nice part of the season, you might get cheaper tickets. You used to see this with cruises, which you took cruises at certain times of the year. They would be significantly cheaper than if you took them during vacation weeks. And particularly for, let's say, people who are retired and don't have to, can go at any time, this made a lot of sense. The second kind are allowances. So the most common here are trade-in allowances. So when you trade in your old car, they give you a trade-in allowance toward the purchase of your new car. So if you turn your old car, you might get $10,000 discounted from the purchase of your new car. And lastly, promotional allowances. So second type are segmented pricing, which means in one way or another, you are creating different pricings basing on time, location, different types of the product and customer segment. So let me start with product form. And where you see this a lot is home appliances. So very often you'll see refrigerators or stoves, ovens, dishwashers, and there'll be different colors or different finishes on the outside. So usually it's white, black, and chrome. Generally, chrome is the highest priced. A white finish on your appliances is the cheapest. There probably isn't very much difference in the cost to make it. Functionally, the refrigerators are exactly the same, but because people see that one as an upscale look, generally you'll see the chrome being priced something on the order of $50 to $150 more expensive than one that is black or white. So that can be kind of a variation in the product form. I've also seen this with bookcases where you'll see the same bookcases and you have an option of different colors, and certain colors are more expensive than others, even though the bookcase is more or less made of the same material. So colors that are considered standard, so white, black, wood stain. But if you want to get it in kind of an off color like hot pink or purple or things of that sort, generally that won't sell as much, and you might see that as cheaper in terms of product form. Location pricing can come in two different ways. One, this might be a difference in the cost of living between different areas, but the other one is that you might see higher prices in a more affluent locale. But the other one is that you can see for shipping. So there may be different taxes depending on where something is being shipped to. You can see this sometimes when you buy things on Amazon. The tax, shipping, and handling will be different depending on where you're asking the good to be sent to. One place that I've experienced this recently myself is trying to get topsoil and fill delivered. So from the distance from the place where it's from their depot, sets different prices and different zip codes or like distance from their shipping point, and that's to take into account the cost of transportation. Time pricing. This is more or less that in the early late spring, lawn and garden things tend to be priced up because people are getting ready to take care of their properties. Right before the winter season, outdoor lights are higher priced. After they're lower priced. You can see this in terms of apparel, so different fall, summer, winter, depending on what time of the year. So I'll give you one example in terms of apparel. sweater vests are considered a fall item, and so they're generally only in stock in the fall, and they're higher priced. But if you want them some other time of the year, you might not find them stocked in most apparel stores, but also that they'll be discounted and they'll be getting rid of it, usually in the mid-late winter to the spring. Customer segment. You might see customers paying different prices for the same good, but this might be tied in with, let's like, location and timing. So, for example, you can see things like beverages this way. So, for like soda, if you get a fountain drink, a 2-liter, a can, or a 20-ounce bottle, it is not priced by how many ounces are actually in the container. Fountain drinks tend to be priced more expensive, even though it's exactly the same thing, as they can be found in a 2-liter bottle. You can see this with drinking water, whether it's kind of a handheld versus kind of a bulk. You can see that kind of segmented, which is usually tied to what type of customer you are, i.e. a customer in like a customer in a restaurant versus a customer in a grocery store. So these are some different ways that you can see segmented pricing. So one example here is, Evian water in a 1-liter bottle. It costs about 5 cents an ounce. Whether if you get it in kind of a refreshment spray, which is the 5-ounce can, it can be as much as $2.28 an ounce. And so even though it's both Evian water, in a sense, they're segmenting by difference of use and difference in customer. Another price adjustment strategy is psychological pricing, and this is where most common is where you see something that wants to make it seem less. So when you see that $2.99, $1.99, $1.99 doesn't sound like $2, it sounds like $1. $2.99 doesn't sound like $2. It doesn't sound like $3, which is close to. It sounds like $2. So that is one thing that's kind of psychological pricing. The other thing is to price at certain key points. So 1 cent, $1, 99 cents. And people tend to price things like hundreds, $150. And a lot of these are kind of, I run into this mostly with real estate. And the way that people look at real estate, particularly now on online, is that they tend to set ranges. And so that, different ranges usually correspond to different types of buyers. But very often what you'll see is when agents list real estate, they'll list it right under a cutoff point. So they won't list it at $500,000, they'll list it at $495,000. And partly that's to manipulate, let's say, the price per square foot, but also to kind of create the illusion that it's cheaper. And it also kind of just signal like negotiating range. So what it does is it sets kind of reference points, and that kind of, in a sense, can encourage sales, encourage the buyer to act. Promotional pricing is when you try to create a sale and you list it below price, or 50% off, or special season, or going out of business, or change in product line, and it's to create a sense of urgency, which means if you don't buy it now, we might run out of this and it won't be available later, and you have to buy it before a certain season. And you see this in terms of like seasonal sales that most retail stores go through in the course of a year. So some other promotional pricing. One is to have discounts, some things that are called loss leaders, where things are priced below, that they're not actually making any money. In fact, they're losing money on it. And that's to encourage people to come into a store to purchase other items that are maybe priced higher. So, for example, what you see often is milk and eggs are priced down, and because those are perishable items that people have to constantly rebuy, if those are cheap, people will go there to buy those items, and then while they're there, they'll buy more expensive items like on the shelves because they're impulse buys or something of that sort. You see this often where in delis, the sandwiches are priced really low, and making them seem like, okay, I'm hungry, that's a good price for it, but the beverages are priced over. So the idea is that you have a loss leader on the sandwiches, but then you make it up for on the purchase of beverages. Special event pricing, so different holiday sales, seasonal sales, things of that sort. Cash rebates, which is kind of this idea that cash rebates, usually see it phrased that way for automobile sales, which is the idea that you're not spending money, you're getting money back. So, for example, when you buy a car, you're usually getting a loan, so you're not really putting any money down. And even though the loan is a lot of money, to get money back, it's kind of makes it easier to kind of sign on the dotted line to make that purchase. Improvement on financing, warranties, maintenance, which would make people more likely to buy something if they're worried about the quality. But to go back to cash rebates for a second, very often I think colleges use this for scholarships, which is that they set their tuition really, really high, much higher than they anticipate anyone paying. And more or less they give you a scholarship, which is sort of like a cash rebate. And what they find is that when people get scholarships, it makes people feel wanted. And as you know, like i.e., you got a scholarship, so you might be one of our better students. And so what they do is they set their tuition, their normal tuition prices really high, with the anticipation they're going to give most of their students scholarships to make it seem like their cost of the cost of tuition in college is actually reasonable. But they're not really in the sense of what traditional scholarships were for students that were exceptional in terms of academics or athletics as they would be in the past. So some downsides to promotional pricing is that people learn or they get expectations, which means that if I know there's going to be a sale, I might delay my purchases until the sale, and I never buy things at the regular price. And particularly for me, I do a lot of home repair, and I do a lot of, let's say, when I buy a grocery or food and things of the sort. Because of my own experience in life, I was a produce clerk, and I've done a lot of stuff. I kind of know when the sales are, and particularly with the internet, where people kind of share these tips and information, people have learned to anticipate sales and to hold off buying on something until it becomes a sale, and then let's say buy a lot. And as a result, the price promotions don't really increase sales. They just move them around temporarily from people not buying at one period of time and waiting for the sale. And as a result, you can't just cancel the sale because then people don't buy at all because they're waiting, waiting, waiting. The second thing is that when you reduce prices and you do it in a regular pattern, it makes you seem cheap. Because the idea is that if you really have high quality merchandise, you're worth the price that you're charging. And if you're to lower it to increase sales, it means that the only reason to buy it is because it's cheaper in price and it becomes a greater value. And the last thing is that when you lower prices is that you can get into price wars where you cut your price, but then your competitor cuts their price, and then you have to cut your price again. And this just eats into your profit margins. So a few other things, price adjustment strategies, geographical pricing is that different parts of the country or world, some of this has to do with transportation costs, some of this has to do with cost of living in different areas, some of this has to do with relative demand for products in different areas based upon climate and other things, what you might call the different basket of goods from place to place. The second is what's called free on board origin pricing, which means that when you buy something and you have it shipped, there's what's called free on board or free off board, which means that the ownership of the item, when do you time the transfer of ownership from the seller to the buyer on an item? And the reason here is that who is responsible for shipping? So free off board means that the shipping is the responsibility of the seller. Free on board means that the shipping is the responsibility of the customer. And so what this can do is lead to adjustments in pricing depending on whether the seller is responsible or not responsible for the cost of shipping. And what can sometimes happen is that the customer can be responsible and they pay an additional price to pay for the shipping of the item. This has some accounting implications as well because whether you are the value of the item, whether shipping, particularly when you're dealing with inventories and you're, like people who are stocking, wholesalers, retailers, and things of that sort, the cost is the cost to acquire something. So if shipping is part of the cost of acquisition, you need to allocate that to one or the other. So this can lead to differences in pricing depending on who agrees to pay for the shipping and handling and things of that sort. You can have what's called uniform delivered pricing, which means that no matter where you are, it's the same rate. So the point is there's a standard shipping and handling charge regardless of how far it's going. This can sometimes make it more expensive if they're actually close and local. You can have zone pricing, which is something I discussed before about the delivery of, let's say, bulk material like topsoil or fill, that they have different zones. And depending what zone you're in, the charge for transportation and shipping is different. And so the point is the more distant the zone from the shipping point, the higher the price is charged. Um, so base point pricing, kind of the similar idea that the base point is where the seller is and how far the person is. The freight costs, even though the goods could be shipped from different places. So let's say I have my headquarters in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but it might be shipping from a warehouse in Pennsylvania or California or Texas or Florida. Even though the warehouse is relatively close, because the headquarters is located in one particular area, you're going to calculate the shipping costs as if it was going from that headquarters. Freight absorption is basically seller pays for the cost of freight. So all of these are different ways because shipping is part of, you can negotiate whether shipping is included and shipping is not included. And you see this most often when you buy things online because they make it see, they calculate the taxes and they calculate the shipping and handling after, so it sometimes makes your purchase look like smaller than it is. But obviously you can make price adjustments um, as a way of kind of trying to convince people that what they're paying is less and therefore they want to purchase more, at least more in quantity. Dynamic pricing, I talked about this before. It's that the price is kind of changing all the time. You see this with airline tickets very often, where if things like Priceline and Expedia, where you're trying to get cheap tickets on prices, so cheap tickets on flights. So, for example, as you get closer to the time of the flight and there are unsold tickets, the prices will go down. And you can see this in terms of sometimes Uber and Lyft have dynamic pricing. You can see people have suggested having dynamic pricing on tolls and highways and bridges as a way of kind of evening the load and trying to get people to choose less busy times during the day and not overwhelm, let's say, the use of certain services. Um, International pricing. There's a lot of different things when you're working internationally. There can be shipping costs. There can be tariffs. There can be special shipping and handling required by different countries, and therefore there might be an additional cost that you might include. So this is just what I was saying before, economic conditions in different places. There can be a difference in currency. There can be changes in the exchange rate in currencies. There can be competitive situations. There can be laws and regulations when shipping abroad. There can be changes in paperwork and declaring things. Some things might not be able to sold over international lines. Um, and there are sometimes where different people in different countries have different expectations. As I've mentioned sometimes in the past, the level of packaging that's usually demanded by a Japanese consumer is much higher than it would be demanded by an American consumer. So why would you want to maybe cut the price of your product? And sometimes this means in the long term. It could be because of excess capacity. This is what you saw very recently with gasoline prices, is that people were not driving at all, and there's only so many places to store refined petroleum products, and basically they're willing to lower the price because they have nowhere to put it. So what happened with oil prices, particularly, is that there's basically two different sources of oil in the United States. You have what's called WTI, which is West Texas Intermediate, which is oil that is extracted in the center of this country and shipped via pipeline. And then there's called the Brent price, which is the Brent price is an island in the North Sea off England, and that is the price of oil that is shipped in, across the oceans in tankers. And what happened is that particularly the pipelines have nowhere to put the oil because it has to flow through the pipelines. And so what happened is the West Texas Intermediate, because people had stopped moving and stopped driving, they weren't using gasoline, and they had to cut prices because there was nowhere to put the gasoline and the oil products. It could happen because of falling demand. Right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in a very weak economy. People are cutting prices on airline flights and whatever just to encourage people to take advantage of it. Um, you're seeing a lot of different people cutting prices just to stay open. And lastly, it can be kind of a way to increase market share and dominate the market and create a monopoly pricing. We've seen this with big box retail. There used to be several department stores in the area, and when Walmart first arrived, they had much lower prices than the competing department stores, whether it was Caldor or Jamesway. Caldor was where the Kohl's is today. Jamesway is roughly where the Walmart is located. Um, they might lower the prices as a way of chasing out their competitors. You can see this also. Um, Amazon had very low prices initially because they weren't charging state sales tax, and as a result, it was cheaper to buy things online than it was to purchase things in a brick and mortar store. And what happens is you get a monopoly position because your competitors have gone out of business, and then it allows you to raise prices in the future once you've dominated the market. Um, Price increases. So price increases can be, I mean, obviously the higher the price, the greater the profit, as long as all the other costs are constant. But if there's over demand, you might raise prices because you can't handle the demand for it. So you raise prices so that, um, uh, which means since you don't have the item on hand, a way of slowing down demand until, let's say, inventory catches up is by raising prices. It could happen because of cost inflation, which means some input into your production process has increased in price. So this might be airline flights and gasoline prices. Um, and you're seeing this right now in the pandemic, which is the idea that prices are going up. And even if it's not illegal, you want to avoid the practice of price gouging because it makes you seem like, a, practicing unfriendly business practices, and people have memories about your reputation when you do that. So you're seeing people are worried about price gouging, particularly with PPE. You saw with concerns for certain food products, especially when limited, there were limits on how many items you could sell when people were, let's say, stocking up right before the state closed during the pandemic. And the point is that people might pay that price because they're desperate, but when situations change, they might not bring back their business because they felt they were taken advantage of. So, what happens when you are responding to your competitor changing prices? So, for example, we can just walk through this flow chart to kind of indicate like probably what is the appropriate reaction to competitors' changes in price. So, if the competitor hasn't changed their price or hasn't cut their price, you should just hold your current price and you monitor the competitor's price. If they've cut their price, you have to think about, if we follow them and we lower our price, will this negatively affect our market share and profits? If it won't, then you keep your price, which means that if you're going to keep, if you're going to have the same market share, you're going to have the same markets, keep your price at the same level. And if you can take effective action, which are the four things on the lower right-hand corner, then you might take action, which means reduce price. You might, in a sense, position yourself to make your product look like greater value, so it's not, in a sense, substitutable with what your competitor is providing. You can improve the quality and say, look, we're not going to be the low price um, distributor. We're going to be the high price distributor because we sell a higher quality merchandise. And then you might launch a second brand, which means you might keep your existing brand at its current price, but you might issue a second brand that can compete in the discount market. So a good example of this is Bounty, which is a name brand paper towel. Procter and Gamble, which is the manufacturer of Bounty, also creates basic versions or cheap budget-based versions, which can compete with its competitors and still maintain Bounty as kind of like the top line in the market. As, let's say, if you have the money, this is the best product for paper towels. So finally, we're going to talk a little bit about public policy, which is that there are certain things that are illegal. You can't have price fixing, which means you can't collaborate with your competitors to set the prices at the expense of the consumers. You can't have predatory pricing, so you can't price things in a way of like just trying to get market share, to take advantage of situations simply to put your competitors out of business. So the point is you can do it, but you can't do it in such an egregious way. I mean, what might happen is that the federal government and various regulatory agencies might come in, usually because your competitor makes a complaint, and then they have to make a determination of whether your pricing is not in line with your cost structure or not in line with, what would be required for a competitive market economy. You can't secondly is in terms of the consumer, you can't have price discrimination, which means you can't overtly have two different prices for two different classes of individuals. So the point is you have to have some type of reason, even when you are segmenting the market. It can't be, let's say, one price for blonde people, another price for redheads. You can't have deceptive pricing, which means the price that is being charged has to be advertised. There can't be like hidden costs or hidden fees under it that are not easy, not well conveyed or not explained. And so what you're getting at here is, are you affecting your competitors or if you're affecting the consumers? And there are certain laws that say that you can't price in such a way to take advantage of either consumers, which are protected by the government, or your competitors who have a right to compete in the market under fair terms. So one thing that's happened recently, and this is one of the last points on this video lecture, is that even though checkout scanners arguably more accurate, everything is barcoded, prices are set in, people believe that they're being overcharged more by retailers than in the past. And they might believe this because they think the codes aren't set correctly, that the ticket price in the aisle in a grocery store or department store reflect a different price, and so when it scans in, the sale might have expired, but the clerk didn't take down the listed price. And so what you see is actually more complaining about the cost of things and people watching as things are being scanned and they're seeing it on the LCD screen in the checkout register.